And here we go. I'm Greg Farrar. It's February 9th, 2021, and this is my latest episode of the COVID-19 Trends live stream, featuring, again, my awesome pink tortoiseshell specs, which I wear when I can't find my real glasses. So you're in for a treat. It's not just the spectacles. Cases are down. Let's get right into it. First section will be this one, which is countries, followed by states of the United States, followed by counties of California. Something like 15 minutes for each section. So looking at the countries, these are just the worst. I'm looking at the severity metric, which is my own metric combining daily cases per million and weekly growth rate. Those two combine. If you have more cases, you have a higher severity, but also if you have a higher growth rate, you have a higher severity. And if you have very high growth rate and a lot of cases, that's when you get bumps like this here in Belgium when they shot up to 3,000. I generally think of 200 to 400 as a hot spot for severity, so we still have a lot of trouble in the world. I'm going to zoom in a lot here now. Just show the latest, but notice we don't see anything in the 2,000 to 3,000 range. We do still see several countries very high though. Even as of today, we don't even have anyone at 1,000, but just recently we had 1,400, 1,200, and so on. Portugal, Spain, Israel, Lebanon. Those were our worst recently. Right now, Portugal's still the worst, but obviously dropping very quickly. Israel, can hardly read that, Bahrain, and Spain are the worst. Slovenia, Albania. Let's see, what's the theme here? Looking a little Middle Eastern, looking a little European. Yeah, that seems to be the theme here. Nice to see, I've never seen this one before. North America as its own line. I don't understand that. Ignore that. Now, the data source, Our World in Data, has generally been pretty reliable. Maybe it's combining, maybe it is actually showing here. I'm going to have to get rid of that actually from my data. But I'm guessing this is the aggregated data for all of North America. And that may be something kind of new. At least I've never noticed it. Or maybe it's just never gotten this high. But ignoring that, the United States is not too bad. Not too bad, United States. You were up to almost 1,000, dropping all the way down to something in the realm of 300 in severity, which is still kind of a hot spot compared to historical numbers for COVID-19, but certainly a lot better than it's been. Let's look at the two components of that. That is typically what I focus on, the daily cases per million and the growth rates. I never know which one to do first. We'll do daily cases per million first, I guess, this time. In terms of actual cases, these are adjusted by population, so you can compare regions to each other, including states and counties and countries. You can compare them in numbers. Anything over 200 is pretty bad, a hot spot. Everything over 100 I'd call a warm spot. Anything under 100 is pretty good. In the top 20 here of all countries of the world, you can see they're all hot spots. But in fact, they're not noticeably better than they have been. Some of them obviously really are. For instance, Portugal has been dropping significantly. It was atrocious at 1,200, and now it's atrocious at 900, which I guess is good. But on the other hand, we've got Serbia, for instance, which was also in over 1,000 for a little bit, and now has dropped all the way down to 230. So that's quite good. It's so low that it's almost not a hot spot. But the big picture still is this virus is everywhere. It's a lot of places are very hot, still not safe. Things tend to be getting better, but you couldn't tell it from this graph necessarily. Let's look at all of the countries together and see if it shows up in any sense that things are getting better. I don't really see it actually when I look at this graph. It seems like some things are getting better. A lot of these lines seem to be dropping. I will say that the worst places are getting better. Portugal, Israel, Spain, Slovenia, Lebanon, North America, again, hello North America, the country, the United States, all of these getting better in cases. So that's good. But we also, there's a real snarl down here. It's hard to say what they're really doing here. We have a few places like Bahrain that's not looking so good. let me see if I can just focus on that just to show some of the counterexamples. Bahrain really shooting up again. Bahrain has a sad past in these graphs. It, together with Qatar, were really, really terrible at one point last year, and then it got a little better, and then it got really terrible in October, and then it got quite a lot better, and now it looks like it's pretty bad again. Again, 200 is a hot spot, and here it is at 400 and rising rapidly. But that is, I would say, the exception. Mostly what we're seeing here, at least among the big ones, there is a sense that the ones that have the most cases per million are dropping. And so that's a good sign. The other one that I see that's a clear and visible exception there is Albania, also rising, it seems, fairly quickly right now. And then the rest of them are, many countries are not hotspots at all. The ones that are hotspots, if let me just try zooming in on some of these, whoa. Yeah, that's such a snarl, really hard to say anything about that. But broadly speaking, a lot of countries are not hotspots. Some are, maybe 50, 30 of them, and the worst of them are getting better in terms of dropping. So that's good. And I'll actually pop over to the total graph of the whole world here, which this is the growth. Yeah, well, first of all, the cases. Whole world cases daily was just around 1 million. Is that right? 1 million cases a day. I don't look at this graph much, so I didn't realize the number was that high. But that seems pretty terrible. 1 million cases a day, and it was steady since this only goes back to December. But it's been steady since then, and until January, until the holidays were over. If you've been watching this show, you'll know that the holidays really hammered us, especially in the United States. Thanksgiving and led to a large spike. I would say it was caused, the large spike was caused by Thanksgiving, but can't prove it. And then the winter holidays also were followed by a large spike. I would say were caused by a large spike, or rather, a large spike was caused by the winter holidays. But all that's over now. And as we had hoped, the world as a whole is declining very nicely since then. This is obviously not Thanksgiving and Christmas that are necessarily causing these. So it could be, because those are not worldwide holidays, at least not in all places. But we do know that the United States was a major contributor to cases. So the recovery of the United States tends to mean, and has recently meant, the recovery of the world. And certainly there are winter holidays in many countries. So that and probably vaccination has led to this, and also fear, as I often talk about, the value of fear. People freaked out when they saw how terrible things were in December. They started behaving themselves, and so now here we are on the eastern slope fear of that worldwide, and we can see the numbers have dropped significantly from 1 million a day down to, we're seeing most recent day, 500. Drop of 50% from the average down to this data point, or about 40% from the average to the average, which is really what we should measure. Even so, these 3 recent data points could be the beginning of a trend of even sharper downwardness. And if we look at the growth rates, we're going to go to the separate country growth rates soon, but for the longest time, the growth rate of the world was around 0. It never really got high, never really got low. It was typically below 1% and above -1%. This is daily growth rate. And so it just wasn't really going anywhere. And we can see that in this graph because it's flat. This is when it's at 0, it will be flat. This is the slope of that. The change is the slope of the daily cases. And but in recent weeks, I guess, the recent month, it's just gotten better. And the world's growth rate it's not just that the cases are dropping, it's that the growth rate's dropping. The growth rate was 0, and then -1%, -2%, and clearly coming up on -3% now. -3% growth means every day the world has 3% fewer new cases than it had the day before. And that adds up at a -3%. What is that? In a month, we could, if it actually kept it that, we could be, almost down to 0 in a month. 30 days of 3% drops, it tends towards flattening out, never actually goes to zero, or maybe someday. But in any case, the slope right now is going in a very nice way that could just point to a matter of just a few months until we have not zero, probably not ever zero, but dropping and dropping and dropping. And from what I understand, we can't really expect ever to see COVID go away. It will probably become something like another common cold, but it can and will drop much, much lower than it is now, and everyone will get it when they're young, and people won't die because people don't die of colds. It'll probably be worse than a cold, but it will be maybe more like a seasonal flu might be more accurate. But it's a coronavirus, like many colds, so it's maybe more like a cold than a flu. In any case, numbers are looking good. The world dropping in growth rate. That is great. Now, I haven't shown you the separate countries in growth rates, so let's take a look at that. Look, just let's say since November, when things really got terrible. Right after Halloween also seemed to really be a problem. You wouldn't know it from this graph. I think that it shows more obviously in the states graphs. This graph seems fairly flat to me. I'm not seeing, well, I guess if we look at the very latest data points, what we are seeing is we've seen recently, again from around January 10th, just in the past month, we've seen those growth rates decline for many countries. From positive, in fact, to negative for most countries. There are a few of them, like Bahrain. I bet you're going to see, nope, that's Albania. I thought it was going to be, what was it? Portugal? Anyway, Portugal is there, but we saw Portugal has had some pretty bad numbers, but if you actually look at Portugal, it has turned the corner. It is now shrinking. It just had this long period of strong positive growth, 50% a week. That really adds up. That gets you some big numbers. That gets you a high severity score. But as it heads down here, now it's shrinking at 12% a week. So Portugal also following that trend from roughly January 10th down to now. The past month has been good for many countries, and we see that graph generally. Now, what we're also seeing, which worried me about 2 weeks ago, and maybe it still does worry me, we don't see this downward trend continue for these countries. Let's zoom in a little. Yeah, actually, I almost think I can see it better when it's not zoomed in so much. Anyway, whatever. It starts around the January 10th, and it gets better and better and better to something like January 30th. And after that, these lines flatten out. So the bad news is the growth rates aren't dropping anymore. We're not seeing hardly any of these countries, maybe Portugal, with dropping growth rates. Most of them are horizontal. The good news is that the growth rates are below zero. So to take, for instance, Lebanon, too bad. Lebanon's growth rate, which was at 50%, dropped and dropped and dropped to 21%, is no longer dropping. Too bad, it's no longer dropping. But if you can hold a 20% weekly growth rate, negative 20% weekly growth rate, your problems are over. It'll be just a matter of weeks until you're at a fraction of your current cases. A matter of months if you can hold that until you have no cases to speak of, until you can probably really go back to business as usual almost. So this is the trend we see for a lot of these places. For whatever reason, 30% is kind of an asymptote for growth rates. They head downward until they get to about 30%. We don't usually see 40%, even less do we see 50%. They tend to flatten out at around 30%, 20%, sometimes higher, and then they just stay there, and that's good. That's normal. That's kind of the best we can hope for. The graph that shows cases dropping will keep going down. The daily cases graph will keep going down, but the growth rates tend to revert to a mean, I guess, around maybe negative 20% when things are going perfectly, and they just stay there. And so this is fine. It's what's not fine is when they start doing a Slovakia here and head back up to zero and go above zero, or a Serbia here. So we still have definitely a few of them. Who else? Sweden, where the growth rates are rising. But for the most part, even those are still below zero, near zero. Only two countries of the hottest in daily cases have a significant positive growth rate. And that's Albania and Bahrain. United States, I'll zoom out here. Let's just take it back to November. That beginning tail doesn't mean anything. It's just an artifact of the way that I'm processing the data. I should probably get rid of that someday. It was never up whatever percent it said it was. But this is just this is exactly the curve we've been seeing. We'll see these for the states as well. There it was. There came Halloween. Boom. The slope of indiscretion. People freaked out, stopped hanging out together. Boom. Eastern slope of fear. And then, I was expecting, then came Thanksgiving, western slope of indiscretion. They freaked out, eastern slope of fear. Here comes the winter holidays, western slope of indiscretion, eastern slope of fear. And now there are no holidays. I worry a little about the Super Bowl. It's almost a holiday. We'll find out in a week whether the Super Bowl is going to create its own western slope of indiscretion. But if not, the United States is doing just what we would hope. It got over its growth. It's seen a rapidly dropping growth rate, and now it's leveled out. We could wish this were negative 30%. That happens. But I'll take 15. I'll take 17. 17% weekly drop of daily case in the United States. If we can hold that, we're golden. And right now, it's not showing a strong trend away from that. So we've held this for quite a while now, really since we turned the corner on January 21st. If we can keep that trend for a couple months, then we're golden. And the way we do that is just by doing the same things that we do every time we're on the eastern slope of fear. And that's to say we take all the precautions, mask up, stay away from other people. These are all about not staying away from other people. There's nothing else that causes this disease. You get this disease when you don't stay away from other people. You get this disease by being infected, by being with other people indoors in a room for a period of time without great ventilation. So keep doing the things, a couple more months, and we should see improvements. We should see this total daily cases drop to almost nothing, relatively nothing, at least relative to the November peak. The vaccine, of course, is also a factor, and that may be part of this. At this point, with 10% of the country having had one shot and 2% of the country, it might be, having had 2 shots and being fully vaccinated, even one providing maybe 50% protection, and the second one taking you up to about 95 or 90 maybe, that 10% of the country immune from vaccination, plus maybe 10% of the country immune from natural immunity, having recovered from the disease. We're up to 20% immunity, and that definitely is a drag on the downward. It's a downward drag on this graph, which is good. And as we continue to vaccinate, which is happening pretty well, it seems, at a pretty solid pace. I forget what the number is, but it's happening at a solid pace, 1 million a day or something like that, 1.5 million a day. I think we're approaching 1.5 million vaccinated a day. This will just have more and more tendency to head downward. As we've talked about, however, the upward trend, the upward force, in addition to things like the Super Bowl or spring break, if we have one this year, but even more things like the winter holidays, the upward force, other than indiscretion in staying away from other people, is this possibility of variants. There have been at least 3 variants detected. Generally, they seem to be no more dangerous in terms of if you get it than the original variants of the virus, but they do spread faster, quite a lot faster. We saw I wonder how the United Kingdom is doing. I keep wondering this. Yeah, this is actually very good news. I was noticing this and wanted to bring it up. Very good news on this question of variants. There's been a real fear that the United States, for instance, and really the world, is going to shoot back upwards because the new variants have a higher R0 factor, and they therefore spread much faster, and more people get infected for each person who has the disease, and so it's just a worse disease. It's a worse epidemic, and it is a worse epidemic now that we have the new variants. It's worse than it was last year in that sense, but we also have the downward pressure of the vaccine. And it becomes kind of a horse race. Who wins? Does the vaccine pull us down hard enough, or does the new variants pull us up hard enough that we cross 0? Do we end up positive? Do we end up negative in growth rates? Well, here's some good news. The UK is one of the places where one of these variants was first detected and was and showed apparently a remarkable spread, a remarkable increase of spread. And that's, I would say, probably this bump, really. This is a new variant, maybe more than anything. But the great news is that in spite of the new variant, the United Kingdom is now seeing a 30% weekly decline in cases. And that suggests that this variant isn't, at least not always, going to wreck the curve. This variant, in spite of having a new variant, plus whatever variants we found in other places, there's one from California, there's one from Brazil, there's one that first detected in South Africa, they're all over the place. All of these variants are faster spreading than the original ones, but at least in the case of the one in the UK, it has not shot off to infinity. In fact, it's doing better than the United States right now. So that bodes well, I think, for the United States. The United States will get all these variants eventually, but we have vaccination, and fortunately we're in a period when there aren't a whole lot of holidays for people to get together imprudently, and so we have, I think, a chance of holding the curve where it is against the pressure of that variant. But we'll see. The variant could still win. All right, that was more of the time I intended to spend on the countries. By the way, I haven't checked my chat recently, but if you want to drop something in chat, the one person who's actually watching this live, feel free to. All the people, I get vast majority of my watchers after the fact. All of you, feel free to drop messages on the video, that just the after live video, whatever it's called. And I will, in the messages in particular, if you want to ask for a particular country, region, or city to be focused on, can't possibly focus on all of them, so I just focus on whatever anyone's interested in. So, states. So that's kind of crazy. I'm not sure if I believe that. I'm just going to take New Jersey out of the mix for a minute. Or at least I'll take a moment to look at New Jersey and say, in severity, though it might have been 12,000, and that could indicate an extremely high growth rate for one day, which could be something like they didn't report all the cases and then they reported all this next day and it looked like they had 10,000% growth in a day, and we get something like that. But that is an outlier, probably an anomaly. Certainly doesn't seem to represent anything but one extremely high day. New Jersey since then has done fine and is now down, relatively fine. It's down to 263, still arguably a hot spot, but certainly not something totally outrageous like this shows in severity. So ignoring that one then, obviously the severity is much better than it used to be. We had a lot of states above 1,000. In fact, almost all of these states were above 1,000 just a month ago. Yeah, a month ago. And now everyone's below 1,000, and in fact, they're on average in the range of 500, maybe 400, I'd say. And all of these are still above 200, all 20. So we still have 20 severity hotspots, but they've certainly recovered a lot. If we look at the very short term, it's hard to say. Yeah, I'd say broadly they're heading downward still, slowly, much more slowly than they were before, but they're heading downward except for a few. North Carolina might be a trouble spot. And I don't know, maybe South Carolina. The Carolinas, eh? And Arkansas is bad, and Texas is bad, but maybe getting a little better. Texas is the most severe state. Texas is the worst state. Hear that? Healthcare workers from Texas. On the bright side, we may find that, we'll find that the growth rate in Texas is actually better now. I'm going to just pop right over to the growth rates of the states because that's been the most interesting graph. I actually used a different graph this time for my thumbnail for this video. I'm going to do all the states. I think we can do all the states. Yeah, the states, I used a different graph that wasn't this graph. I used one that was the total cases, because the total cases, or the daily cases rather, the daily cases is very interesting and very clearly shows a decline, whereas before it was always just kind of a muddle. But this still is the most consistent graph, we see that same pattern. It's all about holidays. Thanksgiving, Halloween, Thanksgiving, New Year's holidays. All of those, and then a kind of a flattening out here after it dropped way down, some of them to negative 30%, they flattened out. And so, of course, we saw, the country, since all the states pretty much follow this trajectory of the graph we saw the country does as well. So, yes, the states are all really very good on this graph. We almost couldn't hope for better than this. There's one straggler here, Guam. North Carolina maybe is a little problematic. Vermont got above zero for a bit, but everyone else here is down in this cluster of rapidly shrinking, or at least shrinking. There are a few that aren't that rapidly shrinking. Alaska's only shrinking 2% a week, and Arkansas 3% a week. But almost all states are shrinking in cases. They're all below this line. Now look at my favorite comparison is always California and Colorado, the two states that I live in. Both shrinking. Colorado is kind of losing it a little bit here. It was down to a nice 30%, very nice 30% negative weekly growth rate. And now it's kind of losing it back up to 6% negative growth rate. But if it can keep below zero, we'll be all right. Trend is upwards. Little thing to be worried about here in Colorado. But if this keeps going, we'll start growing. But a little poem for you there. But in California's case, we are 30%. You couldn't ask for better than that. 30% is about as good as it gets. Weekly growth rate, negative 30% weekly growth rate, and stable. And again, it really doesn't typically drop below 30%. There's just something about there will be new infections, and the best we can hope for is about a drop of 30% a week. And then, of course, that takes us down to zero in a matter of not too many weeks. So you'd think in 3 or 4 weeks we'd be down to zero if it could hold 30%, but it's asymptotic towards zero. It doesn't just drop the same amount every time. It drops 30% of the previous week, and so it never reaches zero. But it can eventually get down to under 200 or under 100, and then we can start feeling good about things. Let's look at a few of our other favorites. For the person, I have a second concurrent viewer. I am officially a YouTube superstar. Louisiana for one of my likely current viewers. Louisiana is looking good. They had a little trouble there after all the other states recovered. They had a little bit of shoot upwards, but they're back down now to the 22% weekly drop. So not sure what happened there. That was not in keeping with the other states, but Louisiana is back on track at a very nice downward clip. Let's look at Texas. We saw Texas before. Texas is right around zero, similar to Louisiana really. Got kind of low, 15% drop, and then lost it completely up to a positive growth rate, and now seems to be swinging back down. So, yeah, Texas, not the best state, but all the states are a lot better than they were. Texas is showing some promise to be able to join the pack in the negative range again. Ohio, looking fine. Ohio is just doing a classic graph here of couple 3 holidays, and then flattens out in the strong negative. Michigan is fine, negative and flat. Georgia maybe is even better. It's negative and actually dropping. If I'm forgetting one, let me know. But the states looking good growth rate wise. So does that mean we can go outside and kiss strangers? I will tell you from this following graph, but I fear the news will be negative in that case. The answer is no. It is not time to kiss strangers. And here's why. So we just saw the growth rates are good, dropping, but we got so high in December, so high that even all this dropping 30% a week has only gotten us down to this, what we see before you. What you see before you is the daily cases per million by state. recall 200 and above is a hot spot. That's pretty much everyone. Almost all states are hot spots. Obviously, they're all trending downward. Everyone's getting a lot better, but we still have some. South Carolina keeps coming up. As North and South Carolina are just kind of a wreck right now. I don't know why they're the worst. Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, again, also showing its sharp downward turn. I'll show that a little bit more closely. A very sharp downward turn in Texas. Hopefully that continues, because otherwise Texas is one of the worst. But it won't take long at that slope to get down into the pack. Who's actually doing well? Guam. It would be a good time to move to Guam. Hawaii as well. I don't think they'll let anyone in, but if you can get in, go to Hawaii if you can. Much safer there to go outside. Still, even at 50 though, 50 is not actually safe. 50 is like, maybe we could do indoor dining safe. 50 is not, now we can have a party with 100 people, or now we can meet without masks and 50 people inside an enclosed building. That's more like 15 safe. If we get down to 15 or 10, we might actually start talking about doing things like taking off the masks, but not yet, not even close to yet, because right now everyone's above 200 mostly. So I was going through Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico. Yeah, go to some island territory if you can. This is the time. Been waiting for that vacation. This is your opportunity, if they'll let you in. But if they're smart, they won't, because they know that you're coming from one of these states that are hot spots, and you're likely to bring the infection to them. North Dakota, though. North Dakota had it really bad, and now it is under 100. I don't know the last time I've been able to talk about a mainland, what do you call it? Continental, whatever. One of the non-island, non-Alaska states, non-territory states that was actually not a hot spot. The territories fluctuate all over the place. Sometimes they're 1 million, sometimes they're practically zero. They're so small, they don't have that many cases, and so they have a lot of volatility in these numbers. But North Carolina, also small in population, but not Carolina, North Dakota. I wonder if I can go back. Yeah, this is such a beautiful graph. This is actually the whole history of North Dakota. Not back to its founding, but back to April of 2020, which is considerably more recent. But back when we first started tracking the cases, it was at 50-something, and it had cases. But then they had some motorcycle rally. Don't know what they're thinking. And they had the worst. They were red hot along with South Dakota for the longest time, and higher than everyone else. Let's just take a look. Yeah, there they are. Hi, North Dakota. Worst of all. The worst of all. In all time. They win. Crown goes to North Dakota. But then after November, the November peak that everyone got and that North Dakota got worse than anyone, they started dropping, and now they're the best of all. So I don't know what to say about that. I don't know what that means, but North Dakota, anyway, is the place to vacation if Guam won't let you in. All right. What else to look at here? I guess we were looking at who else was not terrible. So the good news then is that we don't have a bunch of states at 1,000 daily cases per million. 1,000 is outrageous. It never should have happened. I don't know. All right. I don't know. It's just terrible. No one should be going outside their bedrooms when there's 1,000, much less leaving their houses. But there are a lot of states now that are down into the 600, 400 range. 600 is still pretty terrible. You can maybe leave your house to go to the grocery store as long as you've got scuba gear. But until you get down to 400, I wouldn't say you're anywhere near being safe to be in company of any sort. And 200 is what I call a hot spot. So still a lot of virus going on in the United States. Getting better, but not time to relax. Except if you're into North Dakota. If I lived in North Dakota, I'd be like, maybe I'll have that barbecue. Maybe it's time for that outdoor barbecue. But not time for the indoor party, even in North Dakota. All right, that's kind of the states. We'll just keep watching, but so far the trend is good. The vaccine is certainly helping. We do have some evidence that one of the vaccines, Oxford whatever it is, Novavax, or is that a different one? The Oxford something vaccine may not be effective against one of the variants, or not as effective as some, but then nothing seems to be as effective as these remarkable mRNA viruses, the ones we've got from, I never have been any good with names, Moderna and the other one. The ones that are actually being given right now in the United States are just amazing, and there are so many good things about them. I can't go on. I can just go on about it forever, except they're hard to store. But some of the other vaccines are showing a little bit of wear around the edges, and so we'll see what happens with the Oxford, etc. vaccine and some of the other ones. Even without them, though, we have 2 successful vaccines that if we can build refrigerators to go into Eastern Africa, we're good, or Central India. And for the United States, we're just good because we have refrigerators. So yeah, this trend downward is probably due to the vaccine. It's probably due to the lack of any large group holidays in the United States. So those are, the holiday thing is just luck, or maybe it was bad luck when we had 3 of them in a row. The vaccine thing is just the hard effort of a whole lot of people, and that's good. I'm going to move on to the counties of California. I might skip severity. Well, I'll at least briefly show severity. So counties being small entities, some of them, like, well, Imperial's not that small. Fresno, some of these aren't that small. They're not even that small. Counties, anyway, are smaller than states and countries, and therefore they tend to be more volatile, and we get some kind of crazy spikes here. But not recently. If we ignore those spikes, from which we've now recovered, we see that counties as a whole in California are doing very well. I don't think I actually showed. I'm going to jump back to the states for a minute. If I showed it, I don't know that I said it. California and Colorado, the actual daily cases per million of the 2 states that I live in. I showed these graphs, I think. Hope I showed these graphs. Anyway, if not, I'll get to them next time. But I know I showed the general graph of all the states together and some of the best and worst. California and Colorado are neither the best nor the worst. They're, I think, both mid-pack here. But California down to 325 daily cases per million. Still a hot spot, but boy, have we come a long way. Colorado, which never mostly was as bad as California, at least not during the December time period, down to 240, almost to the point where we can say it's not a hot spot. It is certainly no North Dakota with its sub 100 numbers, but it's doing very well. And just quickly, a few others, Texas. Well, we did look at Texas. All right, I'll just move on. These graphs, of course, available to you at gregfarrar.us. You can go look at your favorite state. But for me, I was waiting for California to get under 400. The community I live in there started taking pretty draconian safety measures at 400, including masking in the house. And then it just got incredibly bad past then. And we were just like, what more can we do other than literally putting in a snorkel and going in the swimming pool for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks? What can we do? So we didn't really do much more, but none of us got COVID. So I guess that's okay. I guess what we're doing was enough. But 400 was a cutoff where we started to say, okay, we can relax our most stringent measures. We don't always have to mask against each other in the house, for instance. But still, we're still a hot spot until it gets down below 200. I don't know that we're going to relax any of our other precautions for a long, long time, like masking in public or hanging out indoors with other people. It'd have to be in the teens, I would think, into this number before I'd say, okay, we can have a small group of 5 people in the same room, unmasked. I might do that when it gets down to 10. But for now, it's at 300. Nowhere near that. Still very dangerous. And Colorado, better, almost to the point of not a hot spot, but still very dangerous. So 300, California rather. And here we see that broken down by the worst counties. The best of the worst, YOLO here, is actually not a hot spot anymore. I don't think we've been able to say that for a while either. There are in the top 20 still a few counties that aren't even hot spots. We don't have enough hot spots to fill the top 20 spaces. Well, this is certainly interesting. Tuolumne we always see, I think we see, Tuolumne just pops up now and again. I think it's just small enough that it flings itself around a little bit wildly on the graph. But it was pretty stable for a while, and now suddenly it's got a huge spike. So I wouldn't trust that quite yet to mean anything. Yeah, it's really just a one day thing. So probably an anomaly, probably going to get back in line soon, but we'll keep an eye on you, Tuolumne. Tulare, also heading a little bit upwards. For the most part, though, everyone else among these worst counties is flat or slightly downward. I'll focus on specific counties. Well, look, Los Angeles, San Diego, also both looking, they're in the top 20, so that's bad, but they're looking pretty good. Low 200s, still a hot spot, but just barely. So that's kind of the theme here of California. Still a hot spot, but just barely. If we look at severity across, and these are severity again. I don't know if I mentioned that. Same idea. This is a lot of them in the 2 to 300 range. Let's look at the growth rates. One component of severity. So just to kind of summarize, it's not very severe in California. We don't have anyone above 500, and really even above 400, except maybe Tuolumne. These are all the counties. Yeah, these are all the counties, and they're all there's nothing like this horrible mess we had back in January, where tons of counties were above 1,000. There's nothing like that. California is looking much better. Let's look at the growth rates, and that will probably tell us why, because these growth rates must just be declining. The growth rate's going to be a little hard to read here. All right, I'm going to zoom in close so we can see. Now I'll get a little further back. I'm going to ignore the dotted purple is probably just some weird tiny thing. I'm not going to go into it. But if you look at the growth rates, it's below zero, all of them, pretty much. Tuolumne, maybe. Kings is looking really problematic, actually, in growth rate. Kings and Imperial, the royal couple, do love going off to infinity. So this could be because of the prison. In Imperial, it's often because of people seeking healthcare across the border, it seems. That's the best guess I've gotten on why Kings and Imperial behave so badly. But certainly Kings is still a real problem. I wonder, with growth rate like this, I wonder why it wasn't showing up in severity. It may not have that many cases right now. It may be rising quickly from a low number. But everyone else, without exception, well, Mendocino maybe, is just barely positive. Every other county in California is shrinking. Every county in California is shrinking, with very few exceptions, and has been since, well, January 22nd. A couple weeks now, and for a while before that, there was a trend downward. So California is looking very good. And you know that whole thing I said about how you never get below 30%? It can happen, especially with smaller counties, and so we do see quite a few, even Riverside, somehow, not a small county, is managing 40% negative growth rate. So that's exceptional. We're seeing some amazing recoveries here. Riverside was quite bad, but according to this graph, Riverside, it's at 40%. Negative growth and stable, which is terrific. You'll get yourself almost out of almost any hole pretty quick that way. Let's really quick look at just to see what Riverside looks like in the daily cases per million, because I think it's still maybe a little bit bad because it was so bad. Yeah, it is still a little bit bad. It was up in the 1400s, 1600s, terrible numbers, and it's just gone sharply downward for a week or more. And now it's down to 400, which is bad, by the way, just to be clear. 200 is a hot spot. Riverside is not a safe place to be. It's just a lot better than it was weeks ago. And that's generally true of most counties of California. I'll stay on this graph for a minute just to give a sense of the range. You can see obviously the counties were terrible back in December, and still kind of even in January, after other states were recovering, the counties of California were still terrible. But now if you look at them, somehow I pulled up a dictionary. Let me not do that. The trend, the downward trend is just great, solid, obvious, from a range of 200 to 1,600. We're now down to a range of 130 to 500. We've smushed that graph's range down. 500 is still very bad, 400 is bad, even 200 is bad. 200 is a hot spot. So most counties in California are still not safe places to live, but they're a lot better than they were, and just a few of them are starting to almost get to the point where you could say, well, it's almost safe to be in Placer or Humboldt, but still warm spots. Every single county is still a warm spot. So what we're seeing in California is a dramatic improvement, continuing to improve as far as we can tell, but it was so bad that even after weeks of dramatic improvement, it's still bad. It's bad. It's bad in California. Let's take a look at some of the specific numbers then. So Riverside at 400 is, I don't know, how many ways can I say bad? It's a hot spot, but much better than it used to be. Let's look at Santa Cruz County, my home county. Santa Cruz, bad, but not Riverside bad. 200. That's why we use numbers instead of words. Everything's bad, but 200 is half as bad as 400. So Santa Cruz is hovering right above hotspot range. There's a real chance that Santa Cruz, given the past few days and the general downward trend, is actually going to cross into warm spot range in just a matter of days. That would be nice. And its neighbor Monterey, which had so much trouble recently, also in hotspot range, but coming down nicely. San Diego, declining. Also, a lot of these counties are kind of doing the same thing. I may be repeating myself a bit here. They all were 1,000 roughly. They're all 400 roughly. That's about how it's gone. But some of them are a lot more 400 than others. Riverside, for instance, is a lot more 400 than Santa Cruz. Let's look at San Francisco, because that's an interesting exception. San Francisco is not a hot spot, and it hasn't been for a week. San Francisco crossed the 200 mark and has stayed there, San Francisco County, for a week. So that's good. Now, the bad news is it's not, if we actually have to change our scale. San Francisco is doing so well, we don't need 1,500 on this scale, but we would like to see the granularity below a little bit. San Francisco clearly with a nice downward trend, but a little bit of an upward hook at the end here. It was down at below 150, and now it's up to 170. The curves, they do wave. It probably is still headed downward, but right now it's lost a little bit of its momentum. San Mateo, I know some people were interested in. Let's just try to get the recent data for San Mateo. Yeah, San Mateo, hot spot, but just barely. It's one of the better counties, 200. Generally, the San Francisco Bay Area is doing well. Santa Clara, very much the same. If you count Santa Cruz as part of the Bay Area, there it is. San Francisco, of course, is beating them all. I don't know. Alameda. Yeah, so the Bay Area, looking very good. Everything declining very nicely. Did I already do San Diego? I think I did. San Diego is I'd say kind of average as the counties of California are right now, in that I'll have to zoom out to see it. Because it was much worse than any of the Bay Area, and it is much worse than any of the Bay Area, but the general trend is the same. It's just that it went to 1,200 instead of 800 or 700, and it dropped to 400 instead of dropping to 200. Anyway, good news for California. So much better than it was. Still by no means safe in California. So that's pretty much it. Keep doing the things. Obviously, I hope I've impressed sufficiently the value of that these numbers are not good numbers. Back when we first had this thing in March, April, May, June, we did not have numbers like these, or the numbers like these were considered really bad back in June. And so the fact that they seem good is only in comparison to the miserable peak we've been through. If we can continue to do the things, wearing the masks, staying away from other people in all possible times you can, let me just say again, the way you get the way this curve goes up is when people meet people. If people don't meet people, this curve drops. Period. Of course, there are a lot of cases where people have to meet people. There's social needs. There are educational and employment needs, and you can't avoid all of them by any means. We just have a lot of people meeting people, but every time you have an opportunity not to meet a person when you could have, taking that opportunity helps this curve, and that's what a lot of what's, I think, been helping it and keeping it from ever getting too bad. I'm pleased to say it appears to me that the health care system never collapsed. It would have collapsed in January in California if it was going to anywhere. We had scattered stories of people on gurneys and gift shops and such, but we did manage to keep it to the point where there was an uptick in mortality, probably because people were in gurneys in gift shops, but it never got to the point where people were just dying at home in their bed of COVID because there was no healthcare available to them. Never got even close to that. So all the work that everyone's done, go you, congratulations. I think that we kept this thing, the healthcare system, from collapsing through all the work we've done to prevent the spread. Long enough that the vaccine could come in, take over, and now I think there's essentially no risk of the healthcare system collapsing. I think we're going to be okay in that sense. We're not going to have people dying at home without healthcare, because we're never going to see, I think, another wave like that, because we've got a vaccine now and 20% of people are immune, and that number is just going to go up. I do encourage people to get the vaccine, by the way. I know there's some people who have health conditions or just have philosophical objection to that. Hopefully, I hope there aren't too many such people, because the more people that get vaccinated, the faster this curve drops. All evidence suggests that this vaccine is much, much safer than not getting vaccinated. Nobody dies of the vaccine. Nobody has ever died of the vaccine. And how many people have died of the disease? I can't even keep track. So I encourage everyone to get the vaccine as soon as you can. It's going to be a while. There are a lot of people ahead of me, and I'm relatively old. So get it when you can. And we'll keep working together to drive this curve down the way we have since we all got unwise in late December. Or some of us did, not all of us. That's the news. I'm Greg Farrar. Thanks for watching.